ate a piece of bread that didn't exist. I woke up one morning and went to the kitchen, where my mom was already busy. I was fully awake as I sat down at the table, my plate in front of me. Across the room, my mom was at the stove, making these tortilla-like flatbreads she'd been cooking for me the past few days. Almost as soon as I sat down, she silently walked over, placed a single tortilla on my plate, and returned to the counter to continue cooking. I thanked her and took a moment to really look at the tortilla before eating it. I examined its appearance, the perfectly browned spots, the shape. It was flawless. Then I ate it. I didn't leave so much as a crumb on the plate. I thanked her again, telling her how perfect it tasted, but she didn't respond. I assumed she was focused on cooking and kept chatting about how great the tortilla was. She remained quiet, but finally she said something that stopped me cold. "I haven't given you any tortillas yet," she said. I stared at her, convinced she was joking. But then I got up and walked over to the counter. To my surprise, she hadn't even finished preparing the dough, let alone cooked anything. I was utterly confused. She explained that when I first thanked her and talked about how good the tortilla tasted, she thought I was acting strangely because she hadn't even walked over to me yet. To her, I had randomly started praising something that didn't exist. I returned to my seat, baffled, and moments later, I stood up again, just as she finished cooking the first tortilla. It was still in the pan, and when I looked at it, it was identical to the one I believed I'd already eaten. Old building that no longer existed. This story is written from my mom's perspective. Back in 2021, when I was 41, I was admitted to Wiston Hospital in the northwest of England with sepsis. After being diagnosed with an MSSA blood infection and a heart infection called endocarditis, I spent 6 weeks there while the antibiotics worked their magic. Thankfully, I made a full recovery, but during my stay, something happened that I still can't explain. Wiston Hospital has been around for ages. The original building, which had a distinctive 19th century design, was demolished and replaced with a modern structure in 2010. The new building feels sleek and clinical, completely different from its predecessor. I had a bit of a routine while I was there. Most nights, I'd leave my ward, take the elevator down, go outside for a cigarette, and return the same way. It was usually quiet at night, and I never gave it much thought until one night when everything felt different. That night, after my cigarette break, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for my floor. But instead of going up, the elevator began descending. I figured it was just a glitch and planned to press the button again once it stopped. When the doors opened, something felt immediately off. The hallway in front of me didn't look like the hospital I was used to. The lighting was dimmer, the space was eerily empty, and the atmosphere felt heavy, like I'd stepped into another time entirely. The walls looked worn and aged, as if they hadn't been updated for decades. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the elevator to look around. To my left, I noticed a doorway with a sign above it that read, "Accident and Emergency." That didn't make sense. A&E was supposed to be on a higher floor, not below. I kept walking, unable to shake the uneasy feeling building inside me. The air felt thick, and the silence was oppressive. As I ventured further, I spotted hospital beds lining the hallway. They were old, with metal frames and thin blue mattresses. The kind you'd expect in a hospital from the mid-20th century, not in the modern facility I'd been staying in. The deeper I went, the darker the hallway became, and the sense of being watched crept over me. It was overwhelming. Panicked, I turned back and ran to the elevator. I frantically pressed the button for my floor, and this time it worked. It carried me back up. After that night, I avoided that elevator as much as I could. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was exhaustion, or perhaps I'd wandered into a part of the hospital I didn't recognize. But none of it made sense. A week later, I found myself needing to use the elevator late at night again. I hesitated, but eventually pressed the button to call it. When the elevator arrived, my heart dropped. Instead of displaying a floor number on the screen above the doors, it simply showed the letter X. That was it for me. I turned and walked away. I didn't care if it was a malfunction or some kind of error code. I wasn't about to find out. To this day, I don't know what happened during those moments in the hospital. Some people have suggested it could have been a time slip, but I'm not sure what to believe. All I know is that what I experienced felt profoundly wrong, and it's something I'll never forget. The key that disappeared. Last year, my boyfriend and I lived in an apartment where strange things started happening. Things would just vanish. Not your typical, oops, I misplaced it, kind of disappearing, but truly gone. Random stuff like tools, small bunches of hair ties, or even my iPad, the biggest loss, would disappear without a trace. The weirdness reached a new level one day with my dog. She's a tiny chihuahua, and she'd somehow gotten hold of a rubber, let's call it a personal item, I'd left on the couch the night before. She was running around doing zoomies with it, completely hyped. I laughed to myself and joked, "Watch, this is going to disappear like everything else in this apartment." And then it did. I kid you not, as I walked toward her to grab it, the toy literally vanished before my eyes. 1 second, it was in her mouth, and the next, it was gone. Even my dog froze, looking around like, where did it go? There's no way she could have swallowed it. The toy was way too big for her tiny self. I spent the next hour tearing the apartment apart, searching every corner, convinced it would turn up. But it didn't. When we eventually moved out months later and cleared out the entire place, I figured it would reappear somehow. It didn't. That's when I started asking the universe to just give me my stuff back. Here's where things got even crazier. My boyfriend and I took a trip to San Diego, packing all our things into the bed of the truck. The back seat stayed untouched. We didn't pack anything there. After we arrived at the hotel, my boyfriend suddenly said, "My key is gone." "What key?" I asked. "My work key, the one I've never taken off my key ring," he replied, clearly frustrated. This key was attached to one of those heavy-duty rings, the kind you practically need pliers to open. It shouldn't have just fallen off. I sighed and said, "It's that damn ghost or entity again, taking our stuff." For the next hour, we tore apart the truck, checking every possible spot, the luggage, the console, under the seats, even the back seat we hadn't touched. Nothing. Finally, I said out loud, "Universe, can we please have the key back?" My boyfriend was beyond irritated at this point, but I told him to check the back seat one more time. He humored me, and we both looked back there. And there it was. The key was sitting perfectly in the middle of the back seat, as if someone had placed it there. Neither of us had touched the back seat the entire trip. The way it was positioned was so deliberate that it sent chills down both our spines. My boyfriend looked at me, wide-eyed, and said, "You're a witch." After that trip, whatever was taking our stuff stopped once we moved out of that apartment. I still don't know what it was. Ghost, entity, the universe playing games, but it left us alone after that. Our order. I've been scratching my head about this ever since it happened. A few weeks ago, I met this guy, and we decided to check out this tea place together. When we arrived, the waitress greeted us and led us downstairs to a cozy little seating area. There were maybe 4 or 5 other people down there with us, and it was a pretty small space. We sat down, got our menus, and the waitress left to go back upstairs. This place had hundreds of tea options, and after browsing for a while, we decided to go with masala chai. It sounded good, and there were about 4 variations of it on the menu. Once we made our decision, we closed our menus and just started chatting. Time passed, probably 20 or 30 minutes, and we suddenly realized the waitress never came back to take our order. I asked him, "Is she ever going to come, or..." And he replied, "Oh, I think there's a button under the table to call them." Sure enough, there was a little button under the table that neither of us had noticed before. Side note, the waitstaff never mentioned this system when we sat down, which felt odd. I pressed the button, and within 30 seconds, the waitress appeared, carrying a pot of masala chai. We stared at her, stunned. When she set it down and left, I turned to him and asked, "Wait, did we order?" He looked just as confused and said, "We didn't, did we?" We were both completely baffled. No one had come downstairs to take our order. The guy hadn't left the table to order, and I certainly hadn't. And even if someone overheard us talking about the masala chai, wouldn't they still need to confirm it, or at least explain how the system worked? Then there's the timing. If they somehow knew what we wanted, why did it take 20 to 30 minutes to make? And why wait until we pressed the button to bring it over? It was so strange, like the whole situation was just slightly off. I thought about it afterward and wondered if it was some kind of glitch in the Matrix. One friend I told this story to suggested maybe there's a microphone under the table, but that feels creepy and unprofessional. Not to mention, wouldn't they still confirm the order? Another theory was that a waiter overheard our conversation, but again, wouldn't they at least say something or ask if we'd like to order? The whole thing gave me a weird glitchy vibe. I'll probably never know how or why it happened, but it definitely left me feeling unsettled, and maybe just a little amused. Lost my favorite lipstick. This happened just a couple of days ago, and I still can't wrap my head around it. For Thanksgiving, my husband and I traveled a few hours to my parents' house and stayed for a few days. I packed a bag of makeup for the trip, including my absolute favorite lipstick, Fenty Beauty Gloss Bomb Stick in Fenty Glow. I'd purchased it back in mid-September, so by Thanksgiving, I'd had plenty of time to use it and fall in love with it. When we got back from Thanksgiving, I unpacked my makeup bag like I always do. A couple of days later, I went to use my favorite lipstick, and it was nowhere to be found. At first, I thought it was just buried somewhere in my collection. I do have a lot of makeup. Or maybe I'd tossed it into a purse for an outing. I even considered that it could have fallen out in the car, but one thing I was sure of: I had packed it for our trip. Weeks passed, and no matter how much I searched, it didn't turn up. My husband even helped me tear through the car and the house looking for it. Still, nothing. I got to the point where I was seriously considering buying a replacement because I missed it so much. But in the back of my mind, I had that classic thought: the moment I buy another one, I'll find it. Sure enough, after a month of searching, I placed an order at Ulta and managed to resist buying a replacement. And then, the very next day, I found my favorite lipstick. It was in the makeup bag I'd packed for Thanksgiving, but tucked into a front pocket I almost never use. Relieved, I pulled it out, but as soon as I opened it, I froze. It was unused, brand new. This lipstick has the Fenty logo stamped into the top of the stick, and because the formula is so thin, that logo disappears after just one use. Yet here it was, perfectly pristine, logo intact. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There's no way this could have been unused. I know I used it. I have memories of wearing it, loving it, and even lamenting the fact that it was gone. I wanted to spend $25 to replace it because I missed it so much. But now, here it was, in perfect, untouched condition. I showed it to my husband, pointing out the logo stamp, and even he was weirded out. "That's super strange," he said, clearly as confused as I was. I've been racking my brain ever since, trying to figure out how this could have happened. The only explanation that makes any sense is that I never used the lipstick, but that feels impossible. The memories of using and loving it are so vivid. It feels like I stepped into some sort of glitch in the Matrix. I don't know how else to explain it. The stray cat. I've always made it a habit to feed the stray cats in my neighborhood on my way home from work. I try to take care of all of them, but there's one special male cat who has completely stolen my heart. He's wary of people and doesn't let anyone touch him, except me. The bond we share feels unique, and his affection always brightens my day. Lately, though, I haven't seen him as much. I told myself it was probably because it's winter and mating season, and he might be out searching for a female. But every night, I've been hearing aggressive, guttural cat fights near my street, louder and more intense than I've ever heard before. The sounds make my chest tighten with anxiety because I can't shake the thought that he might be involved in one of those fights. Yesterday at 5 a.m., I finally decided to do something about it. I was asleep when the fighting started again, the harsh cries echoing in the quiet morning. Without hesitation, I grabbed my coat, put on my glasses, and rushed outside. When I reached the source of the noise, I saw him, my stray male cat. He stood with his ears pinned back, his posture tense and alert as he stared intently at something in the shadows. I was about to call out to him and go to him, but he seemed so focused that I decided to wait and see what had him so riled up. Then he let out a low, growling sound, the kind cats make when they're annoyed or warning something to back off. Slowly, I moved closer to him, and as I did, my vision adjusted to what he was staring at. What I saw froze me in place. I don't even know how to describe it. There, under the dim glow of a streetlight, was something trying to shapeshift into a cat. It wasn't just moving, it was spinning, its form flickering like a glitch. It looked like pixels dissolving and reassembling. One moment I'd see it part of a cat's head. The next, a tail would flicker into existence before disappearing again. It was bizarre, unreal, and yet it was happening right in front of me. My heart dropped. The male cat was clearly disturbed, standing in a defensive and aggressive stance. His eyes locked on the strange entity. I could feel his tension and unease in the way his body moved. Cautious, but ready to fight if he needed to. Then, slowly, he began backing away into a small corner. I wanted to grab him and run, but fear kept me rooted. I'm not the kind of person who panics or screams easily, but this was different. I decided to retreat, walking backward as calmly as I could. My instincts told me not to turn my back on whatever it was. Once I got far enough, I turned and made my way home. When I finally got inside, all the emotions I'd been holding back hit me at once. I broke down crying. This isn't the first time something strange has happened to me. I have plenty of unusual stories, but this was different. I can still see it in my mind, clear as day. For those who might worry, I saw the male cat again this morning on my way to work. He was fine, happy to see me, and I made sure to feed him. But I can't stop replaying what happened in my mind. I didn't intervene last night because I was terrified. I hope you'll understand. I don't know how that happened. I'm a 29-year-old woman with a master's degree, a great job, and a reputation for being extremely organized. I travel a lot, so I'm used to knowing exactly where I put all my stuff. Now let me tell you about the USB drive that has been messing with my mind for 2 years. It's a metallic black USB, and I know exactly where I last saw it. On January 6th, 2023, I took a picture of it sitting on my desk at my parents' house the night before I left for a trip. I remember thinking, I don't want to risk losing this while I'm traveling, so I left it in my room at their place. Fast forward a month. I come back from my trip, and the USB is gone. Nowhere to be found. Before you ask, no, nobody touches my stuff at my parents' house. They know I'm a pain about my belongings and steer clear of my things. But this time, I tore the house apart looking for it. Every floor, every drawer, every bag. For days. Weeks. I couldn't explain it. I was losing my mind because it didn't make sense. Eventually, I gave up, but every now and then, I'd think about it and go, what the happened to that USB? It's been 2 years since it disappeared. Here's where it gets wild. Last Saturday, my husband and I were out grocery shopping. We started talking about losing things, and I said, "Do you remember the USB?" He laughed and said, "You need to accept that you lost it." And I replied, "I know I lost it, but it still doesn't make sense and it fucks with my mind." We finish shopping and go home. I'm putting clothes away from the dryer, and I accidentally open the travel jewelry box I used for the last time back in October on a beach trip. And there it is, the USB. Sitting there in the same box as some broken earrings I haven't touched since that vacation. Now, here's the thing. I moved to the other side of the world after the USB was lost. That USB never should have been in this country, let alone in that box. I screamed. My husband comes running, sees it, and says, "No way," especially 30 minutes after we talked about it. I'm still freaking out. What happened? How did it get there? I last used that box 3 months ago, and the USB wasn't there then. To answer your questions before you even ask, my husband isn't behind this. He's funny, but he wouldn't pull a prank that long term. The USB genuinely couldn't have traveled with me when I moved. So please, someone explain this to me. A glitch in the Matrix? Some interdimensional nonsense? I'm losing it again, just thinking about it.